Intermittent fasting is so much more than that because it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. Now, tell me about the pee strips.
Oh, okay. So there are pee strips that you can pee on to detect whether you are likely to be going into ketosis.
Welcome back to the Betterment Experiment, where we make ourselves suffer for the sake of making you better. I'm Jake Epstein.
And I'm Joe LeMay. Thanks for listening. As a reminder, each episode on the Betterment Experiment, we debate 2 life hacks we find on the internet. You vote on which one we implement, and then we report back on the results on the next episode. So here we are.
All right, so last time we debated 2 techniques, talking to strangers and reaching out to old friends. You voted, and unfortunately for the greater Boston area, talking to strangers won, Joe's idea, with about 75% of the vote. And
Felt like a winner when I won, but boy, it was pretty awkward.
Yeah, it was. And so we implemented by talking to strangers anywhere we could really find them. Joe, we had different experiences over the week. Why don't you start?
Yeah, our goal was to have 7 meaningful conversations over 7 days. Well, I definitely attempted to do that. I think I had between 5 and 6 that I could call meaningful. I initiated maybe 20 or so conversations. So
what percent were like total strangers, like no context, no relationship at all?
Oh, so I would say 80%-ish were total strangers. Okay. The other 20% were maybe like an Uber driver, right, or a bartender, where you have some context, or you have an audience that is stuck with you, as opposed to just walking up to a stranger.
We had our holiday parties, so you talked to a lot of strangers then too, but they were like significant others, but there's context.
But since we had been doing this, I think it was helpful. So I did find myself maybe flinching a little bit less when I had to get introduced to, half the party who were like significant others of our employees or reintroduced, etc. So I did find the exercise useful in that way. I never got to a point where I was like, man, I'm getting the hang of this.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I mean, back when I was single, this is how I found my wife. She was just a stranger working in the Barnes & Noble in Boston. And the first time I went in, I kind of whiffed and didn't really keep the conversation going. But about 6 months later, I saw her and I was like, all right, here she is again, this beautiful girl. I've got to try again. And of course, I followed through and eventually got her email address.
Like you're tapping right into like my major issue with what happened over the past week, and it was more of a personal journey than I would say. Like you're describing it as like a skill building exercise or something like that. You're describing skydiving like there's a lot of wind. I had a great view, right? But like you're leaving out like the sheer anxiety of talking to people while they think that you're hitting on them.
You think that? You think?
Yes, because that's just especially when you're talking to members of the opposite sex primarily. But it is 2019. It's like it comes in all shapes and sizes. And I mean, that's one of the many reasons that I had like horrible anxiety talking to people that I had no context with, like people on the train or just like random people that I'd run into. Like they are fairly enough suspect, and like my mind explodes with pressure and anxiety that I really never was fully conscious of having until I forced myself to do this.
Yeah, I had the same thought too. I bet you pretty much zero people I spoke to thought I was like trying to hit on them or something. I think I was just but it did run through my mind, and it made me anxious, as does any possible, or I was wondering if they thought I was trying to sell them something. I think we have this filter that stops us from being friendly and talking to people. I kind of noticed in myself. I think because we're evolved as a non-social creature into a sort of tribal social creature, and if you embarrass yourself too much, or if you were too much out of the norm, maybe your tribe would exclude you, and then that was a death sentence, right?
Yeah, and so
we still today, like if you bump into someone, you try to strike up a conversation and it doesn't go well, like you just move on, but you still have that anxiety.
Oh man, I internalize it. Like I can't sleep at night. I'm like, oh my god, that was so embarrassing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of true for people that I know, but it's different. It definitely made over the last week. It made me realize the differences between making conversation with people that you know, which I'm actually really good at.
You are,
and I've been told that.
I would say you're very social, maybe even charming. In group situations where people. I think of you as one of the more socially graceful people. I'll stop there before I inflate your ego too much.
Well, it's funny because a few people have told me that over the last week when I've been describing what I'm doing about talking to strangers, and they can't believe the things that are happening in my mind. Like when I'm trying to talk to strangers, they're like, "What? You're so good at talking to people."
You felt like you were freaking out.
Panicking, freaking out, pressure cooker, man. I like the things that I can't even go into all the things that are happening in my mind, but I'm like, too much eye contact, too little eye contact. Don't, crack a joke. Don't make them think that you're hitting on them, and things like that. But when you're talking to people that you know, right, and it reinforces all the things that I thought about why like that can be made easier. I use the Ford technique I was telling you about, or FORM is what they call it.
What's that?
That's family, occupation, recreation, and then the D in Ford is for dreams, and sometimes people call it form. At BCG, they call it form.
Okay, so like the conversation's like, oh, what do you do? Where do you live?
Yeah, it's super easy to make conversations.
What's dreams, or what do you mean by that?
That's just like your aspirations. Like, hey, last time I talked to you, you were thinking about like, I don't know, starting a new business or something like that, right?
So these are the areas where you'll question someone to keep a conversation going?
When you know them. Okay. Right? But if you try to use Ford on someone that you don't know, all of a sudden it's the Epstein Inquisition, right? And you're like, hey,
where are you from?
Do you have any brothers and sisters? How about your mother? What do you do for a living? What do you do for fun? Oh, we should do that sometime. You like voting? I know, man. This is what happens inside my head.
That's horrible. That's horrible. Yeah, I have some thoughts on that. We can get to that. But like, other than that, like, do you have any anecdotes of any interesting conversations that you had or anything like that?
I know what you're looking for here. Not really. I mean, I talked to, I'll give you some examples of total fails. There was a guy on the train reading Shoe Dog, which is a great book, by the way, by Phil Knight. Yeah, it's about the
awesome book.
About the dawn of Nike. And I saw he was reading right across from me, like on the opposite seat. It was like easy conversation to strike up. I said, hey man, that's a great book. I read that book. And he said, it is a great book. And I said, I found it really inspirational. He said, me too. And then I realized he wanted to go back to reading the book I was telling him that was so good on reading.
Yeah, right? That was more than half my conversations. It just wasn't the right situation. Someone was moving on, or they're like, what are we talking? Like, we live in New England. We're not friendly here.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
But I also found like a lot of conversations went all right. I don't even know how I started this conversation. We were at night shift with our team, but I went to the bar to go get a drink, and there were like three dudes there. They were chatting. I stepped in like, here's three. I got this experiment. Maybe I can do it in front of everyone, see if anyone. And anyway, got to chatting with them. And man, like they just kept chatting. They told me, one of them showed me how they went to a Post Malone concert in the nosebleed seats, but he had brought wristbands of every color.
Huh.
And then he wore the right color to get into the VIP section.
It's actually a good little hack. That should be one of our fast hacks one of these weeks.
Yeah, hack, but it's a good hack, right? What else? And like, you went on.
What was your opening line with that guy?
I can't remember. that one.
There was a Bruins game, so you're probably like, "Oh, you here for the big game?"
Oh yeah, because sports is always my forte, as you know. Yeah. But there was another situation. This one wasn't like a total stranger thing. This was, all right, check this out. So I was meeting a friend at a bar. So I just started chatting up the bartender, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think what I said was like, hey, how's your night going? Blah, blah, blah. Then started chatting him up and got him going a little bit. But of course, it's a bartender, so like they're pretty...
It's
part
receptive. Of it's part of their job description.
We kind of roped in the person next to me, like two chairs down to talking. Then by the time my friend came, like I was kind of like the mayor of the bar. We were all talking. Then my friend came. We were all talking. We just like had an awesome time there, chit chatting, and it just was like a better vibe than just like, hey, you sit down, your friend comes, and now you're doing, hey, how's your job going? How's this? Right now you got a whole group of people talking, and it was way more lively. I think that's interesting.
That's a better form of the exercise. Not to say that they weren't strangers, because of course they were, right. But the context was right to talk to them, right?
That's
You're in a bar, like people are, unless like you're the guy reading at the bar, you're like looking to be social, as opposed to just someone reading a book on a train or waiting in line to get a coffee when they may not be as receptive to like a new discussion.
Well, I also talked to plenty of Uber drivers, right? But that wasn't the point of the exercise, because the exercise was to get yourself outside of the comfort zone, approach and talk to strangers that you ordinarily wouldn't. But I'd say because I knew I was doing this over 7 days, I also took the initiative to talk to people who, like the Uber driver, like the bartender, just to kind of keep myself warmed up, become a friendly person, stay, loose, so that when that opportunity arose, I was a little bit less flinchy, or at least was in the zone of being a friendly person. And I did think it was helpful.
Hey, the one thing that I found was universal, and this is straight out of How to Make Friends That Influence People.
Okay.
It sounds so simple, smiling. Right? If you say the same thing, but like you're not smiling, like it's creepy, right? But then you have a smile, they're like, oh, it's such a friendly person, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're just like waiting to get a coffee at WeWork or even talking to the guy next to you on the train.
Yeah, this dude's just in a good mood. He's got a smile on his face. He's just going to be chatty.
I want to be as happy as him.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's funny how it works that way.
Good call. Good call. What do you think? Wrap up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up. So, give me your final thoughts on talking to strangers, this exercise we did over the last 7 days.
All right, something I learned. I think that there's two parts to striking up a conversation with someone, especially like a stranger. There's like that opening, like, hey, how's your night going? Hey, blah, blah, blah. Just something to just crack it open and look at someone in the eye and know that they're talking to you. Barely really matters what you say there, right? It just has to be kind of natural and make sense. And I call let's call that the ignition.
Yeah.
Right?
AKA the pickup line.
Yeah, right. But like, I don't think that matters that much.
Yeah.
But then like you gotta keep the conversation going. You can't just say, hey, how's your night going? How long have you worked here for?
Oh, no.
And like have it be questions. You have to have something interesting or observation to say after that. So with the bartender one, right, I was like, hey, how's your night going? Good. And then the conversation petered off a little bit. But then I was like, I was checking out Shazam to hear the music, and I was like, oh, dude, did you notice that Shazam shows lyrics now, and it shows it as it goes? And he's like, oh, yeah, totally. I guess they got to compete with Spotify now. So now we've got, like, this thing that I brought to the table to talk about that anyone can relate to.
And I think you're interesting.
Right? And it wasn't me interviewing them and putting the onus on them. So that's the revving of the engine. And you need that. You need to start it. You need to have the revving of the engine. And hopefully then you kind of have some familiarity. And now the engine is going. You got a conversation going. And then it becomes natural. But like it just opening is not... Like, you can just have the right question, then it dies right away.
That's good, and what you're saying makes sense. I think I would describe it the same way. I mean, I guess another learning that I had from my week is that I have a conversational anxiety disorder, and if you knew the things that went through my mind when I'm talking to strangers, you probably wouldn't talk to me anymore.
So it shined a spotlight on a blind spot of yours?
And it made me realize that I have some work to do there. But
do you think you're actually going to work on this in some way moving forward? Are you motivated?
Well, that leads me to...
Or are you like, I'm done with
that leads me
shit?
to another point. Okay. Context is super important, right? So just like talking, I don't think I'm going to talk to just random people on the 7 a.m. train because I think that they just like don't want to be talked to. Yeah. You know what I mean? Agreed. But I do think that talking to my friends and family and having them tell me that they think I'm really good at conversation and me knowing that like what I do to drive those conversations, I think I can bridge that at least to those like 2 degree separated, strangers, people who work in the same co-working space, our coworkers, significant others at a party, like those are strangers too. And like working on that muscle helps you in those type of social situations.
I agree. I think this exercise definitely showed me that I have some work to do. Like the bartender, the Uber driver, the person at the party I haven't met yet, and just go up to them and say, hey, haven't met you yet. I'm Joe, and just like, I feel like now that we've done this exercise, I'm a little bit more primed and conscious that I should be doing that more.
Yep. Got it. Well, hey, as long as we're giving advice, we got another email submission.
All right.
From Jess in LA. She said, during the meditation recap episode, you recommended the book Wherever You Go, There You Are, which is a book I have read and love. My question is, do you have any other book recommendations that tie into each experiment you guys do, or just general productivity book suggestions? I did read a book called The Fine Art of Small Talk, which is has a number of good tips in there. I can't remember if that's exactly where form comes from, but it's similar types of things, like how you can drive small talk conversations with people.
Cool. I would say that the old classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People, if you haven't read that, you have to read that. Dale Carnegie. It's good. It's worth a reread every once in a while.
Yeah, it's a little dated, but that it makes it just like more cute.
Yeah, that's right, Jake. So you're supposed to say people's names.
Oh, well, thank you, Joe. Yeah. And remember to submit an experiment idea or ask us a question. Send us an email to podcast@getrocketbook.com. What do you say we take a break, and then when we come back, we'll debate 2 new extreme life hacks.
Jake, that sounds amazing.
Thank you, Joe. It's time for this episode's fast hack. Having trouble waking up in the morning? Brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. It will activate your brain and get you going faster.
All right, welcome back from the break. For today's debate, we're pitching 2 extreme eating habits, and we got a couple trendy ones for you. You want to start, Jake?
I do want to start. Intermittent fasting. I'm a big fan. Been a big fan for a long time. So intermittent fasting is where you don't eat for a large portion of the day. A lot of times people will do a 16-8 fast, which means you don't eat for 16 hours, and then you do eat essentially whatever you want for 8 hours. We can come back to that. But there's variants of that. Some people do 24 intermittent fasting, where they don't eat for 20 hours, eat for 4. And it doesn't really matter as long as you get over the 15-hour mark. That's when it really the positive effects kick in.
So you can eat pretty much whatever you want, but there's a window where you're just not eating, and that's the important part.
That's the most important part.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And we can come back to all the benefits, but why don't you tell us about yours?
All right. Mine is the keto diet or the ketogenic diet. So you pretty much eliminate carbohydrates from your diet or greatly reduce them, increase the amount of fats, especially certain types of fats. And after a few days, it's hard at first. The first 4 days or so, it's pretty hard. You get maybe some symptoms called the Keto Flu, where you just feel sluggish. Then you get over this hump, and your body kind of changes its state, where you're no longer really hungry. You've overcome what everyone else is experiencing day to day, which is they think is hunger, but really is an addiction to carbs. And you get in a state where you're now burning ketones as opposed to just glucose in your blood. And in that state, you have higher state of mental clarity, and you just have less hunger. So getting that calorie deficit, skipping a meal here and there just isn't a big deal. And, since January or so, I've lost about like 20 pounds doing it. And I found it, once you get into it, to be really manageable and really easy to comply with. But you have to get in the zone, and you have to plan ahead, because you can't just grab a sandwich anywhere. Right?
Okay, I got it. And before we compare and contrast keto versus intermittent fasting, keto is a diet. Right. And I think for the benefit of our audience, they should know that, like, historically, I've been a clairvoyant when it comes to just fads in general. Joe once made us buy 1,000 fidget spinners to have for sale on our website, which a couple years ago.
They're going to be big.
They're coming back. They're coming back. I think. Did you have Crocs? I bet you had a pair of Crocs. But I am telling you, man.
Toe shoes.
You had toe shoes.
No.
That's right. Keto is going to end up and you heard it here first, and I know this is a controversial statement, but hey, I'm making news here on the Betterment experiment. It's going to go down in history with Atkins, the Zone Diet, Paleo, South Beach, because it's all this, the Subway diet. You're basically Jared Fogle over there pitching me keto.
I think keto's going to go down in history as like how Joe LeMay just lost 20 pounds, so I'm pretty all right with the fad.
You're describing it as a diet. And so intermittent fasting is so much more than that, because it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. And it's something that you can sustain over your entire lifetime. And with keto, and any diet, I'll say, it requires just the right foods. Yep. It requires a balance. I think keto might require like pea strips or something like that. Don't you need that?
That's not necessary.
Okay, well, we'll come back to the pea strips here in a minute. Yeah. With intermittent fasting, you lose weight, you get more focused, and one of the big things is that you live longer, because it is truly fasting your body, which promotes cellular repair, and so you can read all about it. But basically, it's an anti-aging thing, and so there's been studies that have been done in mice and monkeys, and it helps to reverse.
So is it just because of calorie deficit, because it's lowering your calorie intake?
That's right. It's something about the cycling of eating and fasting.
Okay.
And so it's a lot more than just just a diet. And the biggest thing is that it's so simple to do. It's kind of like when we were talking about meditation, where I said meditation's unbelievably simple. With intermittent fasting, you don't need any special foods. You don't need to prepare any special meals. You just don't eat.
Okay,
so
that's
like from
practical.
a minimalist standpoint, I love it.
Okay, from a staying focused standpoint, I love ketosis because you get into ketosis and your brain actually functions better. You stay more focused, but you're also not starving yourself in the morning to get there, right? So the whole not eating in the morning, I'm a little bit sensitive toward, and also you can get a lot of the benefits of fasting from ketosis. A lot of people actually refer to it as fasting simulation. Right?
Yeah, fasting simulation. You know how your body knows you're not fasting? Because you're eating.
Right, but you do go, when you fast
Yeah.
for an extended amount of time, you happen to go into ketosis.
Okay.
This just allows you to go into ketosis without starving yourself.
Ketosis sounds bad for you, doesn't it? Like, it sounds like it's bad for you.
Well, then don't fast because you're going to go into ketosis
No,
eventually.
No. What happens is that your body stops burning glucose.
That's true.
And then it begins to burn fat.
Right. And the way it does that is it breaks them down into ketones. So that does happen when you're fasting. That's what these two protocols have in common, is you do get to a point in both of them where you are going into some sort of ketosis. Usually in mine, you're just eating fat, you're not starving yourself, you're not getting into that state. And yours, you do have a window of time where you're not eating.
Now, tell me about the pee strips.
Oh, okay. So there are pee strips that you can pee on to detect whether you are likely to be going into ketosis.
All right, well, here's my proposal. I think that you're going to get a lot of intermittent fasting, all right? It's going to change your whole viewpoint on it, and it's going to simplify your life so much because you have all these special foods. I know you got a pocket full of pee strips there somewhere, right? You got to plan your day around being on the special diet. I'm saying that we do a hardcore intermittent fast. We start with 16-8.
Okay.
And then we work our way up to a 24-hour fast. So we drop an hour every single day.
So simple.
It's going to be so easy, man. It's way easier than you think. You know why? Because you just don't eat. That's all you have to do. It's pretty simple.
I get it. Yeah. Well, it's not up to me. It's not up to you. The audience is going to have to vote. So get yourselves over to podcast.getrocketbook.com and log your vote and let us know which one you want to see us implement, and come back and report on what happened.
But for now, thanks for listening to this episode of the Betterment Experiment.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Betterment Experiment with Joe and Jake, the co-founders of Rocketbook. Head over to podcast.getrocketbook.com and cast your vote to help us decide which experiment we'll test out and tell you all about in the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to support the podcast, and we really do appreciate it. Email us your comments, questions, and experiment suggestions to podcast@getrocketbook.com. And please follow us on social media on Instagram and Twitter @GetRocketbook, on Facebook.com/GetRocketbook, and on YouTube.com/Rocketbook. Thanks again for listening, and tune in next time to better yourself.